On the advice of counsel, I refuse to answer. Tell me how you'd like to begin, and we'll just go.
Well, I guess, what are you looking at? I mean, just in general, what have you seen? I'm kind of curious this year, and what do you think the next year's bringing you?
Yeah, I think the trick for us is trying to manage what is obvious growth in violent crime, not in Elbert County. That's not our issue. And whatever uptick we've seen here and there in Elbert County, I mean, it's a factor of one or two cases makes all the statistical difference, so you can't really read much into that. The part of the jurisdiction that includes Aurora, as you can imagine, very active even during the pandemic. We've seen a surge in murder cases. I think they're on pace right now. It feels like it's slowed down maybe over the last couple days, but it feels like they're on pace to have a record number of homicides. That's a big resource suck, as you can imagine. They've had a lot of violent crime related to everything below that. I think that there's an undeniable gang issue going on in Aurora that is, it's not responsible for all of it, because at one point when we used to have 2-3 homicides a weekend for multiple weekends. And I'd ask my guys, what are you seeing out there? Like, what's the pattern? And they said, there really isn't a pattern. One of them is domestic violence. The other one might be a drug rip. Maybe it's gang related. Maybe it's some other thing. There really isn't a good pattern, but the crime is definitely surging. So I think the challenge is going to be for whoever replaces me is what can we do from our position to address that growing part of it. Now, as you know from the jurisdiction, Aurora, and we only have 88% of the population of Aurora in this jurisdiction. The rest is in Adams County. The new 23rd will have far less. Only a teeny tiny bit dribbles into Douglas County, and it's not the part that all the crime occurs in. But they represent about a third of our jurisdiction's population, but they represent 50% or more of the felony filings that we have. That's significant. I think whatever's going on in Aurora in terms of defund the police or redirect funds or whatever you want to call it, that could have an impact. I personally feel like what I've noticed is a much more involved town manager and deputy town manager in Aurora in terms of guiding the police department through its otherwise pretty proactive positions on a lot of law enforcement issues. And that has led to some of the stuff that we're dealing with right now. I think the other thing that we're going to start to see, I'm going to say the chickens come home to roost on this, is that during the pandemic, we put in place at the request of the governor a lot of rules about who can stay in jail and who can't stay in jail. And the jails are very good at following those directions, and they took that seriously. And so Arapahoe County Jail has turned away a lot of people. We are going to measure, every DA in the state's going to measure for 1 week coming up next month. It's either next week or the week after. Every single felony filing that comes in, and we're going to try to measure who was on bail, bond, pretrial release of any kind, probation, parole. And then from that, I asked our guys to whittle down how many of these people are on cases that would have otherwise had them held in jail but for the pandemic. And I think that's going to give us, it's not a perfect scientific study, but a 1 week snapshot across the state ought to give us some sense of what we're seeing. We know from the statistics from just CMAT, which is the Motor Vehicle Auto Theft Task Force, we know that there has been a surge in motor vehicle thefts across the state of Colorado, more so in the metro area, but it didn't end there. It's been everywhere around. And that a good chunk of those are people that would otherwise have been arrested and detained for stealing cars, and they get turned around and sent right back out. I've talked to the commander of that unit, and he's out of Lakewood, and he said, look, we're hearing anecdotally guys that are like, once you tell people they're not going to go to jail, they're going to turn right back around and go get another car. Some of them use them for a place to live. Some of them use them to barter, to get money to pay for something, drugs or otherwise. And they're just going to keep doing it. And so the numbers that they keep putting out show this over just the period of time of the pandemic, this like 36 to 50% increase in motor vehicle thefts across the metro area. There's a consequence to that, right? Like we treat it like some do low-level property crimes. And it's like, tell it to the person who relies on their car for transportation. It ain't that low level. This is not that distant from stealing someone's horse, back in the day. This is how you get from point A to point B. So I think that the challenge for the next district attorney is going to be how to manage that growing piece, undeniable growing piece, while at the same time dealing with the very, very emergent issues of social justice and community engagement with that part of the county. And then at the same time, try to figure out to keep doing the great things that we've been doing through the rest of the jurisdiction. I think that's the biggest challenge. We're growing because the community's growing and the demands are growing. We're trying to figure out better ways to skin a cat in some ways. We've been very blessed, as you guys know, because you participated in this through your funding. You know, there are jurisdictions that don't have the luxury, and it is a luxury, of having a cold case unit or a specialized human trafficking team or even a special victims unit. Well, we have all those things, an elder abuse team, and we're able to put all those things together so that we're able to target subject matter experts and resources on issues in a way that the jurisdictions in the 16th and the 13th and the 15th, just to the east of us, they can't do that. They can't do that. And in part, I think that's one of the benefits of the way they drew up the 23rd, was to include Lincoln County in our situation. If they didn't, if they had recast Lincoln out to the 16th or 13th or something, the resources they'd have available would be much, much, much less. So that's what I think are the big things confronting us. What am I leaving out, Jeff, on the big picture stuff?
Just how things are going to unwind once COVID starts, right?
Oh yeah, thank you. That's the other obvious one that I've sort of had in my head is, we have not opened up the courts to trials. And that doesn't mean those cases go away, even though we've done a lot to try to manage what dockets we have. At some point here, and you should know, our courts are trailing the rest of the metro area. And the thing I can point to is this: El Paso County has been doing more than 1 week-long jury trials for a long, long time. Jeffco for a long, long time. Denver, over a month ago, I did a more than 1 week-long trial up in Denver on a double vehicular homicide. Adams County just started their prosecution of the guy that murdered Deputy Gum, that cop killer. That's going to be They started that this week. Our jurisdiction, the chief judge, who I think is just very, very cautious, has refused to let any case set to go to trial that would last more than 4 days. Somehow concluding that if we go over a weekend, somehow these jurors and the staff are at greater risk. I don't think there's any empirical evidence of that. No one else follows that. But again, I think it's coming from a place of wanting to try to do the right thing. It's just really hemming us up. The personal impact on me, and it affects the jurisdiction, is I did not want to leave office with those STEM cases pending. That's going to happen now. The court refuses to give us a trial date before January of 2021. Well, I'm gone in January 2021.
I was had breakfast with some of the local citizens down in
Yeah.
the southeast part of the county.
Yeah? Simla-ish or further?
Yes,
Yeah.
similar-ish,
Yeah.
south of that even.
Yeah.
And the quick question for me is, Grant, as county commissioner, what are you going to do about all of these people that don't speak very good English and seem to have unique farming going on?
Yeah, so that's a great question. One of the benefits that we've had thus far about being attached all together with Douglas and Arapahoe and us is that we're able to take metro area resources, which combine the feds and the locals, and we've been able to come out pretty hard on those black market marijuana grows.
That's what I was asking.
Yep, that's right. And so we've done a pretty good job, I think, and nothing's ever going to be perfect because there's just too many of these things, but of bringing Elbert County into that process and trying to shut these down.
Are they big?
They're big.
That's what
They're big.
told me this morning. They're big.
They're very big, very, very big. And, some of the ones out here, and I may be forgetting about a homegrown, forgive that term, but a homegrown group, but many of them are Cubans or Cuban Americans that are coming in from Florida. Yeah. And they find a place that has easy access to water, maybe even existing ranching irrigation, and they set up and they do these things counting on the fact that there's more square mileage than there is law enforcement to stop it. And they guess wrong when they pick Elbert because we have big league law enforcement who's able to come out here. I've flown over this area in the National Guard resources because they have drug interdiction as part of their aviation responsibilities, and we use them a lot. We haven't yet used them for a takedown operation, which they're game with it. We just haven't come up with the right one. But in terms of surveillance and getting imagery that we can later use for search warrants and stuff, all the time.
But
All
the
the time.
problem is real.
Yes, the problem is real. I would say this from a purely economic standpoint. As more and more states, especially the ones that surround us, begin to go towards recreational marijuana, the pressure that exists from us being this great place for exporting and arbitrage, you know what I mean? Like buy low, sell high, pound of marijuana, here's $1,000 on the East Coast, it's $4,000. That all begins to get mitigated pretty quickly. So what we have seen is a lot of groups that had been set up shop here in Colorado. Now that Oklahoma has opened the door, they're starting, I mean, these are the intel guys are telling us, they're starting to move towards Oklahoma. They'll go where they think it's easiest to, I think, capitalize on a lax or pretty new regulatory structure. And I wouldn't call ours straight up lax, but there's definitely things we could do better. There's definitely things we could do better.
About impacts on the DA from SB 217. We're looking at obviously cameras and storage.
Yep.
People that can edit videos.
You've hit upon it.
I haven't looked to see
Hey, you've hit upon it.
On you.
The cameras are a big one. We must increase our budget request for the jurisdiction, not just Elbert, for the jurisdiction every year by how much, man? $150,000. The bulk of that, although not the entirety, is based on our requirements for video and storage. And part of the issue is we're even different than law enforcement. Law enforcement has a short window of storing video based on when it's captured. Like from this moment until this, we keep it. Our period of time to keep it doesn't even start running until the case resolves, right? Like
so we've got to wait through all the
and exactly. Okay. So it lasts for a long, long time. So we end up storing video a lot longer than the local law enforcement agencies. And as you can imagine, with the mandate that everybody get these body cams, all of a sudden, you know, we're seeing 3 to 5 views of the same DUI stop because there's your cover car, there's your supervisory sergeant, there's someone else that shows up. Then maybe they move the guy back to the station, and it becomes pretty oppressive in terms of volume. So we've been working, Jeff and John, who's a great IT guy, best in the business, trying to keep figuring out ways to get lower cost storage, but also, you know, whether it's compression issues or better ways to keep this stuff on board, we've been doing that. So that is one big one. The one that I think that we didn't really talk about, but that we're starting to see, is liability. And not just for the officers, but you know, our investigators are exempt from SB 217. We're not even covered by this. But our professional liability carrier has said, we're getting out of the business. If you're part of Colorado law enforcement, we're not going to get in this business anymore. So we've had to go out and try to find someone else to provide us with this coverage. That's increased by how much? Because that's part of our discussion too, right?
Right. The professional side, it went up, I think, $20,000 from the year before. And then now we're seeing on the commercial side too, they're just getting out of all law enforcement. So we're expecting that could jump $10,000 to $15,000. We're just going through our renewal process right now. So we'll know probably middle of November what that premium is going to look like and who our new carrier is going to be.
But there are still carriers out there.
Yeah, you know, they thought that they could market it to 5 or 6 carriers. They gave us a list of 8. They said, we really don't think these 3 will be interested, but we're going to throw it out to everyone to see, you know, what sticks.
The other answer to this, and if we're talking about, you know, at some point we're going to have to manage the divorce of the 18th and the 23rd, one other way that some folks have done this is to send it all in-house with the counties and make the liability almost like a self-insured type of thing. The county covers it. There's probably some financial good to that. I will tell you that I have concerns about that. No knock on the county attorneys, but they don't know what they're doing with officer-involved shootings or with liability issues for prosecutors. No offense to them, but if someone was going to be protecting my license to practice law or one of my prosecutors, I want someone who's an expert in the business to do it. Now, that's a decision that the commissioners will end up having to make long-term, but they do in other places. Some other parts of the state have gone to just all in-house stuff, don't they?
Yeah, I think specialized circumstances, they'll go to external counsel, but if it's more of a routine stuff, litigation, then they're using county attorneys. I think.
I was really referring to the liability issue.
think counties have absorbed liability much like they have health insurance. Well, I can't say that. How many of the rural jurisdictions have their own specialized policies like we do? Do you know?
The rural, I do not know. I think
Okay.
Jeffco, Adams,
Yeah, I
Denver
can't
are
imagine
all
the
different.
rural counties have done it.
Yeah,
That's where I was going at it, because
right.
if you, each county has, then the combination of all of those fees might be a heck of a lot higher than.
It could be.
Yeah, that was where I was going.
Yeah. There's one other group that provides coverage. It's not awesome, but it would be something that we could use in the absence of something else, and that is the NDAA, National District Attorneys Association. They provide coverage at a national level, but we found that these other carriers tend to give us better coverage, better service, and stuff like that. You've priced them out too, haven't you?
Yep, that's actually who we're with now because they were the cheapest option.
Yep.
So there was only one other company that was interested last year when we went through it.
Was it when did we have Axiom, or what was it called?
Axis.
Axis.
Covered us for probably 10 to 12 years. We left NDAA and went to Axis because it was almost half the premium. And then they were the first ones that said, we're just not going to do lawyers, not just district attorneys, we're just dropping our practice for insuring lawyers altogether.
I guess that's a sign. One other thing as we talk about this, we can go through it, is a lot of these things you'll see, they're different analysis when we get towards the 23rd. When we talk about things like vehicles, it's just a different need. When you talk about the IT storage stuff, we're going to have to come up with a different system. Now, there are some potential cost savings, I think, towards this separation that's coming. Some of them will be because I expect Douglas County to say, look, you don't need to run your own HR department the way you are with your own benefits and your own health insurance. We're just going to bring you under our roof and make you, in essence, part of the county's process and the county coverage. That could save some money. Same thing with the IT portion. They could say, look, well, we'll cover IT for you. We might give you 1 or 2 FTEs to cover some of the specific courtroom stuff and computer stuff that you have and the management of the database that we have with the District Attorney's Council. But I could see them saying, we'll take a lot more of this in-house and try to do an economies of scale thing. I don't think any of that falls on Elbert County or Lincoln County, but I do see Douglas trying to take over that role. And for Arapahoe, I presume they're going to do the same thing. They're just going to bring everybody in-house. What am I leaving out that could be sucked into the county process that we do right now?
One of the bigger challenges as we just everyone has different policies. You have a PTO policy that's probably different than Douglas and Arapahoe, and ours is totally different also. So how are we going to take these employees that have accrued a certain amount and split up that liability between the four counties? We have our own 401k. Are we just going to stop with the 401k and then these employees would join counties' pension plans? Para is something that the DA participates in. There's a big liability for that because Para is underfunded. How are you going to split up that liability between the 2 new districts? So there's a lot of questions around benefits that will need to be worked through in the next, what's now almost 3 years since we're almost.
Yep.
Will there be a natural split of the existing staff? Like, will the 23rd have to hire all new people, or will it be just spin-off of existing staff to help
My
the
guess,
23rd get going?
yeah, my guess is that is a process that is going to begin well in advance of the formal split. Like, my guess is, and if I were in charge over this period of time, I'd be looking to try to say about a year out, I want to start staffing people in the places that they will be in once the wall goes up, in essence, between Arapahoe and Douglas County. There are going to have to be some additions, and this was part of the longer-term pitch that we made when I sat down with Commissioner Thomas and everyone else, and that is, look, most of the administration lives in Centennial because it was kind of the biggest place that we had going. It was the birthplace of the jurisdiction. Some of that's going to have to come down here. Like, we don't have any, well, we have an IT person that I guess is down in that office, but we don't have any real HR stuff down there. We don't have the same kind of logistics. So we'll have to add to that. But in terms of prosecutors and support staff and all that, I don't think that the 23rd is going to be starting behind it all. I think they're going to hit the ground running. One of the bigger issues will be for judicial.
Yeah, I was
because you gotta have judges now that live here.
Yes.
And there's a bunch of them that either work in Douglas but live in Arapahoe, or work in Arapahoe and live in Douglas. That too is gonna have to be, in my opinion, if I were the chief judge, I'd make that transition about a year in advance too, just so that you can figure out everything that you need to before the wall goes up. But I'm not worried about staffing for us. I think it'll be pretty good. I think what you should see, though, depending upon who the DA is gonna be for each of these, is probably competition amongst the two offices. Like, I wanna go work for that lady, or I want that guy to come out, I wanna do this, I wanna pay
Even if
you.
I have to move.
Right? Well, and for the DA's office,
Yeah.
we don't have a, you gotta
Yeah.
live here kind of thing. It just turns out that everybody lives here. But I could see saying, hey man, I want you on my team, I want you on my team, Red Rover, send this guy over kind of a thing. So that could be good. That could be good. Yeah, yeah. But we have enough runway now. It's never gonna be flawless. We're gonna find bugs. We haven't, I mean, look, as a state, we haven't done this in more than half a century. That's all before there was technology and social media, back when life was peaceful and people loved each other, you know what I mean? So I expect there to be some things, but we have plenty of runway to get this done right. What else could you guys think of that you'd wanna know before I zip through
When
all this?
COVID's over, do you see them getting away from, all this bond stuff, limiting the amount of people in jail? I think that's gonna just keep getting bigger on who they're gonna bond out and things like that, or?
So yes and no. Here's what's going on. This is we're subject to a little social experimentation here. In part, the hope, I think, was by the social justice reformers and the people who think that all bail and bond is bad, is that they were going to be able to look back at the metrics over this period of time and say, see, we didn't lock all these people up, and it had no deleterious effect on crime in the jurisdiction. I think that that's going to be proven false. That's why we need to get these numbers together. But there is a legitimate and long-term effort out there by the CCJRC, or whatever they're called, and the CCJJ, the Colorado Commission on Criminal and Juvenile Justice, to want to upend all money bail, but upend the entire bond and bail process so that we keep very, very few people in jail. They want to use these unproven tools, these risk assessment tools, and make that the basis for judges. You have to do this if they have this kind of a score and fit into this. I think it's a huge risk for the community. Well, let me say this. I don't think we ought to have a system that says, hey, if you don't have enough money, then you're going to have to stay in jail, whereas someone else would be able to bond out. But there are other alternatives to just opening the doors and letting everybody out with this idea that pretrial services will solve it all. Pretrial services plays an important role. They cannot prevent crime. Pretrial services isn't going to prevent crime. They can make sure that people are trying to stay clean, that they make it to court, but I don't believe they're going to prevent crime. So this is a yes and no thing. Yes, I think in the short term we'll be able to start bringing more people back on board. Long term, especially with the people that are in power, that have their hands on every lever of government, they're going to push through legislation this year, in my opinion, that really radically changes bail and bond, such that we'll be in a similar situation that we're at right now. That's my sense.
That has a very strong impact for a county like ours. Our jail is 30 years old.
Mhm.
And the sheriff's, the last one in the burn, would like to have a new jail, but they're only half full now. They were almost fully full
Yep.
prior to this virus thing. Now they're about half full. So the question, there's tangential issues that I don't know how to even analyze.
I think the sheriff's going to be in a tough spot just because they have to reassess now, what does this mean long term in terms of our needs. Keep in mind, and you know this better than I do, Elbert County as a percentage of population is going to be the fastest growing county in the state over the next, 3 decades or something. So whatever your needs are today are probably irrelevant a decade from now, because you're just going to keep adding folks, hypothetically.
Yeah, it's because of our location.
Yeah, that's right.
We made it to 1972 with 2 jail cells in the basement of this building.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. And is that when the next jail was built, this jail that we have now?
Yeah, and it was expanded once after it was constructed, so.
We can take it downstairs and show it to you.
Oh, I'd love that. I'd love that. I want to get a picture of Jeff behind bars if we can do that, just for the office.
We can do that.
I do think that's another thing that
Well,
you've
depending
seen
on how this briefing goes.
in other parts of the state where The ACLU is now showing up to sue based on jail conditions to try to, because they know that counties can't afford to build new jails. So their goal is to try to get them to turn more and more people out of the jail. So we've started to see this in other places, that they'll show up and start doing that. Yeah. I'll zip through this if you don't mind, just to give you some budget history stuff. I come in and brag to you all the time about how relative to others in our game we've grown more slowly. What's not up there is 2012. 2012 was the exact same budget as 2013 and 2014. Let me say something else, and I'll put myself out there. I'm certain that the two people running for this office do not want me to advertise this, and that is, when I came into office, I said cut my salary to the lowest and build me back up and make me earn it like anybody else. I think, and I've said this in Arapahoe and Douglas already, and Lincoln, I think that's the same thing that should happen with whoever replaced me, whether it's John or the other person. I would say, tell us why we should pay you anywhere near what Brockler was making. That's what he made in his 8th year. We'll get to that. Why should we start you off there and make them prove to you that? Because I don't think this is a position where you climb on right where the other guy left off. That just doesn't make a lot of sense. That's not what would happen in the real world outside of government. It shouldn't happen in government. That's my opinion. I'm sure if John's listening right now, he's probably saying some very, very strong words. But because he's a Marine, they're very short words. But
His wife might have more to say.
that's right. But keep that in mind too with the budget. I think one of the things you can fall back on is when they come back and ask for more money, say, look, we had 3 years of the exact same budget under Brockler, 12, 13, and 14. Why do you need to expand? And I'm not telling you that they don't. Just make them earn it, make them earn it. So here's where we're at, 31% growth. I wanted to put that in a comparison, and Jeff chased all this down compared to everybody else in the big offices in the metro area. What is going on in Boulder, man? I thought those people hated fracking, but short of discovering oil right there in city government, how can they grow their DA's office 133% over just the time I've been in office? That's nuts. Adams, which is just north of us, more than 50%. Denver, El Paso, all these others at about 50%. The only one less than us is Jeffco, and you guys probably know well from just CCI talk. Jeffco's had some fiscal issues going on for a long time. I mean, they shut down an entire level of their jail because they couldn't fund the sheriff. So I'm proud that we're down in that area. I wanted to compare us to the other players in our court sense of the work increases, as does apparently the budget for alternate defense counsel. That's the indigent attorneys when the public defender can't represent them. These people have seen explosive growth. My God, the judges, I didn't realize this, 64%, the AG 62%, CBI 50, and we're down there at 31%. It means that these are people who have increasing numbers to use on cases that we don't. We're still continuing to figure out a way to be more efficient with less than what they've had. Believe me, I'd love to have those dollars, but man. The salary thing I mentioned to you, that's the most I've made in this job. That's the high water mark there, and it's still below just about everybody in smaller offices. I mean, Jeffco, Denver. I mean, if I'd have known that's how much Jeffco was getting paid, I might have moved to Jeffco and run. I don't know. That seems like a good chunk of money. Pete, of course, I'm sure deserves it. But even like the 8th, Larimer, that's insane. And I know Cleveland's one of the best out there, but dang. And then Boulder, of course, more than me as well. The crime part, we talked a little bit about this. Felony cases up about 50%. Homicides up about 111%. Misdemeanors decreased by 3.3%. I can't point to any one thing for why that is. You know, we did something during the middle of this where we became the 47th or 48th state to turn 4+ DUIs into felonies. That could take some of the pressure off of that. We've, I don't know if you know this, turns out we legalized recreational marijuana, at least in terms of possessible amounts. Those used to be a good number of petty offenses and misdemeanors. Those are all gone. That's my best guess. There's no one thing I think that leads to that decrease. This is our felony growth by each year, and you can see it's been pretty steady, starting at 3,900 way back in the day, and this year will be different. Just because of the COVID, I can't tell you what our numbers are going to look like at the end of the year. I think that they would likely be lower than the 5,700 because a lot of things that have been investigated haven't turned into filings because we can't bring these people into custody anyway. But I expect the number to be a little bit lower there. I'd be shocked if it was higher this year because of the COVID. I wanted to compare us to everybody else. We're kind of right there in the middle of some of the big offices. El Paso's seen a huge spike. Denver, we're right there at about 50%. Jeffco right on us, and then Adams, despite their 57% growth in budget, have only seen a 38% increase in felony filings. This part, the merit increase part, it doesn't impact Elbert a ton, but in the past, what we noticed, especially from like Arapahoe, was that they would make us commit to asking for a certain percentage increase across the board. And then after the budget cycle was over for us and they'd made decisions, like we might have asked for, well, we'll ask for 2.5%. Then at the end of the year, they figure they have enough left. They go, well, we're going to give all of our Arapahoe County employees a 3% increase. It's like, well, wait. That we're getting punished for the calendar, not because our guys don't deserve it. So all we've said is, whatever you're going to do for your own folks, that's all we want. We don't expect any more than that, but pretty please don't make us take less. The turnover piece is important, especially to the extent that it is a product of wages or benefits or something. We've had 19 employees leave this year through August 31st. For a staff of 232 to 235, that's not bad. 10 prosecutors, 3 of them moved out of state. I can't compete with family, when someone's moving back to Montana or New Jersey, I can't compete with that. We had 2 others go to the government, but one of them was one of my Colorado Guard captains who I'd recruited to come work for us, and she worked for us for about 3.5 years. She's now a full-timer back on in uniform every day with the Guard. Can't really compete with that. And then who was the other one? What other one did we lose to government?
Placewitz, we're not sure.
Oh, yeah, we're not sure. One guy left us ostensibly to go to Adams County, but we don't think he ever made it. I don't know what happened, but I don't think
Aurora's a dangerous place.
I don't think he works there. So I don't know what happened. And then anytime someone goes into private practice, it's kind of hard to, But that's what we've got in terms of prosecutors there. Then we've talked about SB 217. All this stuff are things that we talked about, the storage capacity, body cams. The health insurance piece, we went fully self-insured. Am I saying that right, Tim? We went fully self-insured about a year ago. Was it last year that we first did?
Yes.
And that's important because some of what they do to gauge the increase is to look at those claims over that limited period of time. And so we're at this 5.3% increase. Did they finally nail that down? Remember when you didn't know yet what it was going to be?
We have a meeting the 13th to find out exactly what it looks like.
What's your gut tell you? Are we going to do better than that?
No, I think it'll be right there. We've had a couple rough claims months. One, I think, is because more elective surgeries are starting to come back online, so that's caused some stuff. And then, like every health insurance, 90% of the costs come from 10% of the population.
Yeah.
So there's always going to be the cancers out there. We've had a couple of those.
This is another.
Costs, we only went up 2%.
Oh man, that's good stuff. Well, this is one of those areas where I feel like once we get to the 23rd, I just presume Douglas County says, hey, we just want to bring you on board with what we've got, and we may lose the ability or obligation, as it were, to come up with our own health insurance. Vail is all that victim advocacy, law enforcement, victims compensation stuff. We've kind of been hit hard by something that's been taking place, and that is the courts have increasingly waived costs and fees that would normally fund these particular efforts. And our victims compensation unit, these 4 women have been at this now it's one of the most stable units in the office. They have found a way to take care of victims under the statute to a tune that exceeds 17 other states. And none of that is taxpayer money. That is all money that comes through these fees, fines, and costs. So when judges shrug off any request to waive them, like, sure, I'll just waive it. It's had a huge impact. We've seen the revenues drop $180,000 since 2017. We last year squeezed our budget hard and found $50,000, I think. Was it $50,000 last year?
Yeah, we requested 50,000. We do have some reserves because some of this comes from federal and state grants, so we can keep that money and move it forward. But since it's been, with 2020, 4 years of decreases, we're just not going to have any reserves left over.
Yeah.
So that's why we're requesting, hopefully, what is a short-term injection to keep the staff doing what they're doing. You can see like everything, the claims continue to grow. So we really need the staff.
Largely just because of the violent crime increase. The professional liability insurance we talked about. Vehicle leases, we used to own our cars. So when I took over, the office would buy its vehicles and then own them, and then after a period of time, they would rotate them out based on whatever Arapahoe County's metrics were, like if you're over 100,000 miles or whatever it was. Then Jeff figured we could actually save money by doing it differently, by doing the lease. And this is not something where you save money on day one as much as explain how we're going to get to that savings.
So the way that we got to the savings, and I'm sure maybe you guys have an internal service fund where you charge each of your departments to like replenish your purchases of vehicles. Arapahoe County does that, but we were never included. So in 2019, their fleet came back to us and said, you know, you don't have a budget item for this, but you need to replace 14 vehicles. So I didn't think there was any way that I could come to commissioners and say, hey, we need $300,000 this year
For
to
cars.
replace those vehicles. If we lease them, then it helps with our cash flow. Also, with our agreement with Enterprise, we get the equity on those vehicles.
So you get a buyback.
Yeah, we'll have a 3-year lease, and then if the vehicle is worth more than what we've paid off, they pass that back to us. So it's not the typical lease that normal consumers get. So starting in 2021, we will have some vehicles that are 3 years old where we can start to roll some of that equity and lower our lease payments. And then it's also helped with our maintenance costs. I mean, you know, right now we're just doing oil changes, haven't hit any new tires with that, haven't ran into any vehicles that have had any problems.
I have a crack in my windshield, I'm just saying. I have a crack in my windshield. Anyway, when does that lease agreement run out?
They're staggered, so the first year I think we replaced 8. In 19, I think we replaced 12. In 2020, we might do 2. And then in 2021, we're looking at replacing another 6.
So the issue will be too is what happens to this process when we split up between the 18th and the 23rd. I presume Arapahoe would then suck everybody into their car purchasing thing, and I presume Douglas County would do the same thing for the 23rd. So this may be a short-term thing for us, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Oh, talk about this diversion thing that we're.
So the state has changed this process significantly. There was a bill that came out last year, and what it does is it requires every single juvenile that's put into custody to go through a screening process. They've also want diversion to be more in the forefront for all of the district attorney's offices. So they came up with more money. Every county is getting at least $75,000 to get their program off the ground. Maybe that's DA's offices instead of counties. So came up with more money. What we did is we're not asking for any more money from the counties. We're just changing the line items. Before we would charge a lot of our activities to the grant. Now we've switched that over to salaries. And that's just going to give us more flexibility because the last 3 years they would come to us in May and say, hey, we've got $70,000 left. Who wants it? How can you spend it? Well, if we had it on programs before, we went through all of our programs and we didn't have enough time. So now by moving it to salaries, we'll use up most of that money through salaries, and if they do offer us more money, then we have more flexibility to take that on and offset county's costs.
The other thing we've done with that money for the assessment tool is we didn't hire someone or seek to hire someone to do this. We're going to actually send that money to the JAC, the Juvenile Assessment Center, because they're getting all the kids anyway, and having them implement that tool and do the assessment for each of those folks. So we're not ending up doing it in-house. I think that's cost effective and frankly logistically smooth. We've been chosen for a pilot project as well in that area, and there was probably some other part of that I'm leaving out. But you know, keep in mind that our diversion program that we have for juveniles is the largest in the state. It is also the most successful with a less than 7% recidivism rate for kids, which is huge when you compare it to your traditional probation and parole and all that other stuff. So I like the direction we're going. The person that runs it, Sarah, is just phenomenal. None of them are online today, right, for this? Okay, in case you have questions. Any questions about that on the diversion? You guys have made the decision over the year to throw some dollars at us for things that I've come to you for, and I just wanted to update you on some of the stuff here. We've got some slides on each of these. The elder abuse that we stood up was a product of, one, just the natural growth in the elderly population. For a long time, Douglas County, by a percentage of population, was the fastest growing in the country for the elderly population. And as you know, where there's perceived weakness, the wolves show up. And so we've had a lot of fraud, both online and in person. And so this was an attempt to address that. But at the same time, the state passed a law that mandated that every single elder abuse type claim get forwarded from law enforcement to DA's offices. But they provided no obligation under the law for DA's offices to do anything with it. So some of these rural jurisdictions, I've heard stories of, man, we just got a ton of these referrals, got no way to deal with them. So you guys were great about helping us fund this. This is what we've seen. Referrals are up 90%. That's to be expected. Case filing's only up 30%. I wouldn't read anything bad into that. A lot of the referrals are not prosecutable. Either it's not a crime, the statute of limitations has run, or in extreme cases, we just don't have the evidence to prove it up, or the person's deceased, things that keep us from moving forward. But 30% increase in case filings over the past 3-4 years is pretty big. That CARES reporting system has nothing to do with COVID. We're on the cutting edge of creating or participating in the creation of a software, I guess it's a software program, that links together all of these DA's offices, law enforcement agencies, DHS, to the point where our DA's office, to the point where other DA's offices in the states are now reaching out to us and saying, can we have that? Can we use that? Can we do the same thing? Because it's turned out to be such a tool for efficiency. What am I leaving out about the CARES thing?
Are they willing to pay for it?
That's a good question. We hadn't talked about selling it to them. Can
No.
we do that? Do we own this? Do we own the copyright on that?
I think so. I mean, one of the things that we were looking at is
Let's get Boulder to pay for it. My God, they're at 130% growth.
pushing it out through CDAC, where it would become more like our case filing system, where they would control all the IT costs.
Let's see if we can't get a small licensing fee. I mean, even if it was $1 a use, man, maybe that could really defray the cost of something. You know, would you ask someone about that salt or something, and see if they can do it? It's a great idea. Great idea.
Bill them in 15-minute increments.
That's right. Attorney work. And then we've provided a whole bunch of trainings that are designed not just to discover where crime has occurred, but really to empower the attendees to become more like ambassadors to that demographic and put them in a position to keep from being victims or to report crime. And as you know, the worst of these things, it's not the online stuff or the stranger abuse, it's the familial abuse.
Yeah.
It's just that's the worst. That's the toughest. FJC is the Family Justice Center, one place. Now, this is something that has really taken a bunch of turns over the years. I had originally envisioned something that would be like a one-stop place that everybody could go to who was the victim of sex assault or domestic violence, crime against a child, and get all the wraparound services they could need as a victim. And I'd sort of, I guess, been myopically focused on that for a few years, and we went through a lot of efforts to try to put that together with the stakeholders and all this other stuff. And then some women in the office who are victim advocates, community, they just outthought it and said, look, maybe that isn't the best model, is us to find our own standalone building that's going to cause us to invest these resources and cause our nonprofit partners to freak out that we're in competition with them for fundraising. And so what we had set up was a mobile place. So we had gone to Sungate, which is where we do our forensic interviews of our child victims. And they had said, look, come in once every other week or so. We'll give you all this space and all of these just show up for the day. We had pallets of food brought in for that. I mean, and it was hugely successful up until the COVID. Then we went mobile, and we started doing the same thing as much as we could with at least the food and the other resources that were tangible. And we'd go out into Aurora, stage a location. It was by the Aurora Library for a while till they reopened back up. And service hundreds of families doing this stuff. And it has been very, very successful. That kind of a model lends itself to something that we could replicate in Douglas, replicate in Elbert if the need were there on a basis that I think is far more sustainable than trying to find some fixed location and jam a bunch of resources into it. Human trafficking, some big numbers up there. 22 cases per year since 2016 is a lot. The training's really helped too because we're trying to prevent as well as to identify victims. This unit has been particularly successful. These are your hunter-killers right here. If you can see right up there, 17 defendants sentenced to a minimum of 250 years each in the Department of Corrections. There's not a lot they can do to get paroled early. It feels like even if they got credit for day, they're just not going to make it. 2 of those prosecutors from that unit have been awarded by the FBI Prosecutor of the Year awards or Case of the Year, that kind of thing. It's a very successful unit. It's really been hit hard by the pandemic because we've lost the ability to engage in proactive policing, and this is all about proactive policing. This is not reactive. You have to get out there and set the operations like Operation Cross Country and all these other things. This isn't a wait to see what happens. This is a go out and find them, and that's really been hampered by the COVID.
Just a curiosity question, when you read about this in the newspaper, and I don't know any facts, are they all kids?
No, great question. There are a lot of kids, and by the way, it's not just young girls either. We've rescued boys from this, young men, and women who get brought in from overseas, typically Asia or Eastern Europe. We've also encountered them and rescued them. They get brought over here under false pretenses. We're going to get you a visa. We're going to get you a job. All you have to do is X, Y, and Z, and then all of a sudden they're part of this. Kids is a big part of it, but it is not the only part of it. The drug unit, this is the one that has done particularly well out here in Elbert County with the marijuana stuff. You know, we had to expand this by another prosecutor, and we've been using marijuana money to do it, but that marijuana money is drying up. And Jeff, tell them where we're at in terms of what we had last year versus what we expect.
So last year statewide, they awarded $6 million for the application that's due tomorrow. They've cut that down to $810,000 for everyone to split up.
People that quit smoking?
No.
I think our governor is using that to balance his budget in other ways. So
Redirecting those funds. They're there. They're just going to redirect them.
So last year, I think we ended up spending $532,000 money that we got from Arapahoe and Douglas. This year, in this next go round, if the percentages stay the same, we'll be looking at probably $65,000.
It's gonna hurt this unit to some extent because we funded an entire position just to work marijuana based off of those dollars, and 65 grand ain't gonna get us close. So we're gonna have to figure out where else to get those funds from in the operating budget because it's just too successful and it's not going anywhere, and I don't wanna cut back a specialized prosecutor from that. Darcy's the head of this thing, but these guys have done such great work. Even the drug agencies out there recognize them with all these awards for Prosecutor of the Year. Our investigators, either Investigator of the Year, Trainer of the Year for what they've done. Hell, this past week, I testified before the Knesset in Israel, 12:30 in the morning in my kitchen, pajama bottoms, if you will, and shirt and tie, doing the Zoom out to Israel because they're talking about decriminalizing and going recreational marijuana. And so one of the Knesset members out there, through one of our prosecutors, reached out to me and said, hey, can you tell us about your experience? So our office has really carved out a pretty good role as being very aggressive and successful in this, and I don't want to take anything away from it. I don't know what the next DA is going to want to do, but whether or not we get the money I think that we should be getting from the state, based on this Governor Pohl's carve back, we're going to figure out a way to keep funding this. It's just too important. Just some other small things that I want to remind you about because I'm leaving and this will be the last time I ask you for money. We got that, it was actually the 2018, I think, Freedom Award that we got. I think it was 2018. But that's that award from ESGR, Employer Support for Guard and Reserve. Only DA's office in the history of this award to ever receive it. Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, an award at least every year. Prosecutor, prosecution team, victim advocate, District Attorney's Council. This year we took 2 more awards. We took, Career Prosecutor of the Year and Office Manager of the Year, was that it? Yeah, 2 more awards. We've had Prosecutor of the Year, that was John Kellner. Investigator of the Year. We had Prosecution Team of the Year for when we did the Aurora Theater thing. COVA, our victim advocates, have received 2 awards over the years. And then, and by the way, I highlight that to you so that you know that in combination with all the other things I've told you about in terms of trying to be good fiscal steward and the other things we've done, you guys have a damn good DA's office here. I mean, these are folks that really kick a lot of butt and do great work, and I think that'll continue. The legislation piece, this is just going back a couple years. This isn't the whole 8 years I've been here. We provided testimony over 35 times by 18 different employees. I'm good for the bulk of those every year. But we send out subject matter experts to talk about this, that, and the other. We've had 2 laws recently that passed that were the product of efforts really by our office. One is Pella, that's our court dog that works with victims. And there had been a ruling from, I think, a court out on the Western Slope that had said, no, you can't have this victim dog there for the comfort of, bless you, for the comfort of the child witness, even if the dog is out of sight, has no impact, can't do it, run the risk of sympathy with the jury. So we have folks in the office that own Pella and work with Pella, and they got motivated to want to change the law. We backed them, CDAC backed them, they went to court, they went to the legislature, and we got this thing passed this year, so now it is the law. You can't just willy-nilly excuse a dog from this. The other one, though, was a Kellner product. He came to me last year, and well, before last year, yeah, about a year ago, and said, hey, look, there's a loophole in our law that about 47 other states don't have, and that is if you cajole or threaten a witness into not showing up, that doesn't get to just automatically come into evidence against you in the underlying case, even if it's a separate crime. And so in order to protect those victims and to discourage that, John said, look, I want to work on drafting some legislation. I said, the best person to carry this bill would be Rhonda Fields out of Aurora. Now, there's very little that we agree upon on a lot of politics, but in terms of criminal justice stuff related to victims, there is nobody better in the legislature than Rhonda for obvious reasons. And so I put them together, and John started running with this thing. CDC started to help, and I got to tell you, in one of the most hyper-partisan environments that we've seen in the legislature ever, his bill got out of the Senate 34-1. And got out of the House and ultimately signed by the governor. I think it left the House with maybe 6 no votes or something like that. And that is now the law of the land. And that was purely John Kellner with just a little bit of help from the old guy. But tremendous stuff. That's 2 bills on the books from just what our office did. Both of them good for victims. Future budget items, the CARES funding. That's a different CARES. That is the COVID CARES. You should bring up that issue that we talked about on the phone today. What are you guys doing with CARES funding for anything? Do you guys know?
In terms of usage, so we were allocated about 2.1,900,000-ish
Okay.
is nonprofit and business grants locally. There were some per capita shares to the towns, and then the remainder is reimbursement for money spent. Call it 600,000 to 800,000 in potential in projects. One is the improving the ventilation system in the courts, jail, and sheriff's office, and some ionization,
Yep.
cleaning type stuff, upgrades for remoting meetings and remote upgrades to the website to provide more remote services, things that we can do to kind of push people. Well, maybe not push people away, but allow them to access services without having to come to the building.
show up.
So,
Yeah. We have been in a position with Douglas and Arapahoe to advocate for some of this CARES funding to help us offset this coming surge in cases as the courts slowly start to open back up. There's just, it's such a backlog of things that are set for trial and that are coming in. All the filings we expect to start showing up when people can start coming back to jail. El Paso County really led the way on this, and Dan May went to his commissioners early and got a big chunk of money to help them hire some short-term temporary prosecutors just to help dig out of this hole. So we did the same thing, and it's interesting, and Jeff got more details, but like Douglas County has said, great, invested in this. I think it has to go through the counties, right?
Yeah, they went through DOLA, similar to you guys, to make sure that the state is signing off on it. So they had said, yes, we think temporary employment fits under the guidelines. Arapahoe County, when I talked to them last week, said that there were just more guidelines. And Sam and I talked about that. It changes every day. So they have some questions on it. But specifically out here in Elbert, you realize Rory's here every day. He has said that the judge wants to get rid of the backlog of scheduling stuff one on top of another, which is gonna make it very difficult for him to handle that workload. So I think what we would ask of you is, if you have CARES funding, the state says it's okay, could we potentially look at a temporary employer or a temporary prosecutor out here to help Rory?
Just through the end of the year. I think it runs out at the end of the year, so we're talking less than 3 months at this point.
Put it on our list. We
Yeah.
did put a 10% set aside, so, and I don't know, I mean, the pace of trying to get projects through to have things fully
Oh, yeah.
paid for by the 30th of
Crazy.
December is
Crazy.
ridiculous. So.
Are there temporary people of that type that are available?
So we did, because originally Arapahoe had said, no, you can't use it for temporary employees. And then they came back and said, actually, yes, you can. We then went ahead and put out a listing. And we did have people come in and apply for these temporary positions.
Hired guys or what?
Interesting. There was one guy we talked about today, 60-year-old dude that had never been a prosecutor, but had been a long-term attorney, had been practicing law for like 30 plus years, and was interested in doing some temporary work. And then what we're finding is, because of the market out there, there are a lot of young attorneys who are still looking to get their foot in the door. And this is, if not a resume bullet point, it's at least a foot in the door. And maybe something happens and there's movement and you're right there. And it's smart. So we've had applications for those positions as well as a couple permanent ones we're trying to fill.
We do have a couple of retired attorneys that we're gonna reach out and see if they have any interest.
One of them used to be in our office, retired, one of the most experienced prosecutors in the state of Colorado. He's been doing this for 30 years. He was the guy on the Sir Mario Owens, Robert Ray death penalty cases. We're going to reach out to him and say, hey, look, man, just a couple months work, maybe make Christmas a little fatter. You know what I mean? Like, you want to come on board and help us dig out of this. So that's what we're hoping to do with some of those funds, at least in the short term, is to dig out from this windfall of cases. And to Rory's defense, in part, we weren't able to logistically plan for this ahead of time because, God bless him, Judge Kramer had told Rory, hey, I don't want this to ever turn into a thing where we're just jamming things on top of each other. But then I think as this thing drew on and on and on and on, the reality of the situation was this is the only way we're going to be able to do it. So now Rory's scrambling and trying to get, and we're working with him on coverage, but this would be helpful.
Sheriff, if you give me a number, we'll, like Commissioner Rich just said, we'll get it stacked in.
Great.
Okay.
We reached out to the state with similar backlogs for DMV, and they've given us a green light on that.
Oh, good.
For overtime, or for bringing people in on Fridays just to take care of backlogs, so I can't see any reason they would think of this any differently.
As much as the state will guarantee anything, yeah, so.
Just wonder why Arapahoe is so cautious.
I don't know if they've taken a different approach from day one.
Yeah, we did get a little pushback on one where there was monies going to a government agents or another government, which, but I think that's something to just work through to,
Yeah.
because,
Well, I can't see him coming back and saying I want the money.
because you weren't able to apply directly for your own funds, so
No,
that
you
I
gotta go
think
through
would be because they were, especially, I mean, they were considering the communications authority,
Oh.
another special district that could have applied on their own, but they're not, and you're not under that same title either.
No,
So
I wish.
so we
We
probably
wouldn't have
would
to
be.
bother you so much. The IT storage we talked about, 2021 marijuana grant we talked about, planning of the 23rd we've talked about, 2019 legislation on 48-hour appearances. This is one thing that could result in the request for a supplemental by my successor. I'm just putting it on your radar. In 2019, there was legislation to study whether or not we could go from a 72-hour turnaround time to 48-hour turnaround time for people who are arrested. So typically, someone gets arrested on Friday, they'd be seen no later than Monday morning. Well, now they want to carve that back to 48 hours. That means there will be weekend duty. Well, weekend duty means it's going to have an impact on the sheriff because they're going to have people in the courthouse. There's going to be a courthouse hit, and then I need to have a prosecutor and a victim advocate available on a rotational basis, and none of that comes with their current salaries. Like, some of these people are hourly. And so there's going to be a potential hit in terms of the budget for that if they end up changing the law to mandate that 48-hour thing. They just haven't done it yet. They've only studied it. But that's just to put that on your radar. And that's it. Any other questions or anything about that, or anything you'd want to know? This is my last one. You're going to take a shot at it. This is it. Something. I know you're thinking about it. I can see you. You're thinking, what is that question?
based on what you've been hearing from John and his opponent, do you see any directional changes or?
Well,
Obviously there could be, but.
I would say, based on my knowledge of John and having worked with John and his familiarity now since he's been running the show for Douglas, Elbert, and Lincoln at that top level, I don't expect significant changes at all if he takes over. Now, he's going to have some organizational changes, leadership changes, that's all to be expected. But in terms of moving forward with how we handle cases and interact with law enforcement, I don't expect a change there. Based purely on my limited knowledge of the campaign of his opponent, I do expect changes if that happens. I don't know what that looks like. I think that for someone who has no experience doing what we do and running for that office and taking it over, I think running for that office, you get to say a whole bunch of things. And then you get into the office and you realize, oh, this is a much different situation than I thought.
You mean there's a reality?
There is a reality. That is a good way to put it. There is a reality. And I think that reality can be pretty sobering in terms of what it is you can do and the things that you want to do. And I think Elbert and Lincoln are perfect examples of that. There isn't a lot you can do to change this up. I mean, you got to have somebody who is a full-timer, knows the community, knows law enforcement that works down here. Same thing with you. You couldn't just rotate people through there. You couldn't treat it like it's just a 1 week, 1 month kind of an assignment. So I don't expect that to change. I think if John's opponent wins, the bigger issue will be the relationship directly with law enforcement, because the things I've seen out of the campaign are much more akin to what you see out of the social justice prosecutors that have been elected in Philadelphia and San Francisco and other places like that. So how it manifests itself in real policy, I don't know, but I would expect there to be changes there.
Is there anything we should be fearful of?
That. That.
Okay.
I just, again, without being, this isn't a partisan issue. This is really just an experience issue. I just find it difficult to imagine what kind of accountability can be expected from, if a big case happens in this jurisdiction, my guess is nobody in this room doubts who's making the decision on that and how it's being made and where it's coming from. Because I've handled these cases. I've been doing this 26 years. For someone that's been doing it less than 26 months and never successfully prosecuted a felony case at trial, what is the expectation of the public or even the commissioners when something comes before them like a STEM or like an Aurora Theater shooting or, God forbid, something worse later, when you've never been there, you've never done it, you've never set foot on the field, you've only passed by the concession stand a couple times during a game. I mean, there's just no, I don't get how you sit there and listen to people tell you what the strengths and weaknesses of a case are. How should we proceed with the public? Should we ask for more money from the commissioners for this? Do we really need it? I just don't see how you do that as the sole decision maker. What I see is having to sit around and look at a bunch of people that you and I can't name and can't hold accountable and saying, well what do you guys think? Should we vote? I mean, what do you think? And then making that decision. That's the part that would concern me. Without the facts or without the experience to say, and Jeff's been in on some of
Which
these
facts are
meetings.
important for that matter, yeah.
Jeff's been in on these meetings, you know, sometimes.
Worried about this, out in our area, worried about some of the things that are going on in some of the cities.
Well, what did you guys have by way of protests out here? Anything meaningful? Well, okay. By the way, funny story. I'm out in Texas talking to a an elected prosecutors conference, and it was about they'd had some mass shootings in Texas, so they wanted to get together this panel of time. I get done talking, people are coming up, they're saying nice things. This one woman comes up from, I can't remember which big office. She's like, "Hi, I'm so and so. I'm the elected district attorney for someplace." She's like, "Do you have any familiarity with a guy from Colorado named Eric?" And I go, "Oh my God, he's in Texas." Same dude. So I hooked her up with Clinton from our office, and I don't know how that turned out, but I'm like, what? We're in the Republican. Oh my goodness. So yeah, there's that. I don't, not right now, but I think
There was a rumored demonstration coming to be in front of the courthouse. So I got in my pickup and I come and sat there and nobody showed up. So
Yeah.
it was perfect.
I think Elbert County in the short term is probably pretty safe, but I think the only thing you'd have to worry about, and I do out in Parker, is it seems like as growth continues to push this way, it brings all those other things with it. You all of a sudden Parker, which used to be the hinterland.
Like Pebble in the still pond, just kind of.
Yep. And we saw demonstrations down at O'Brien Park there in Parker, right by my house. So we saw big demonstrations. Is that in the future for Elbert County? I just presume, at least Elizabeth, I just presume at some point it's going to come here, but in the short term, I don't think so. I don't. And again, who can even say what politics will look like in 2022 or 2024? I mean, my goodness, man, we just don't know. But it sure is nice out here, and the best food on Saturday. I took a lot of that home. I'm just saying, as leftovers. It's still being eaten. I had some. Oh my goodness! It's that adage is true, and I've said it before. The further you get away from Denver, the better the food gets for politics. Right here in Lincoln County are the best to go to. There was one place in Logan County I went to where it was ridiculous. I felt like they had just carved up the cow in the back and just threw it on the grill. It was that good. And the nice lady at the golf course up there, right in front of my wife, says, I'm not mocking her, but she had an Asian accent. She's like, you know who you look like? I'm like, nope. She goes, you look like Tom Cruise. I'm like, bring it on in here, lady. You are wonderful. And my wife rolls her eyes. She's like, oh my God, don't tell him that. Great food, great acknowledgement of my star-like qualities. I mean, Any other questions before I leave you? I'm also always open for any phone calls or anything else that you guys have between now and at the end.
I don't. I would say, the 8 years you've given to the district are truly appreciated.
Thank you. It's been an honor, and I really think the idea of the 23rd here is going to be something special. I think it's going to be great in 4 years from now.
I think that'll take too much work. I used to do mergers and acquisitions. The first year was always a little bit of turmoil.
I would guess the same. If we're doing this thing right, like I said, if we back plan a year and try to put everything in place and treat them like separate offices with the benefits of not being separate, and we try to dry run some of this stuff and the separation, whether it's IT or whatever, I really do feel like it can be much more seamless that first year, but I would guess probably the first year. But as more and more cases get filed and things start taking place, it'll pick up a momentum of its own, and pretty soon, I imagine. It does. And listen, the election 4 years from now for DA out of Arapahoe County is going to look remarkably different than the election for the 18th this year. So you're right. That could be a big difference maker. That's why also the right person in the right place right now can really manage this transition very, very seamlessly, I think. And then we'll be at a happy place, man. It'll be great.
We've had conversations with both Arapahoe and Douglas about meeting with George before he's out to get his ideas on the 23rd and at least get these big ideas or costs on the table and on everyone's radar. So hopefully the merger is over 4 years instead of the last 6 months. So everyone's open to that. I think it's your staff could say all the CARES stuff and then rolling right into budget season. We had great ideas of having those meetings in July, and now it's October, and we still haven't got it scheduled. Just because
We will need to get back on your radar before the end of the year, because before my success, that salary thing, before they swear in, you guys have had to have made your decisions. So probably worth having them come back in here and make their pitch.
I would say in terms of meeting with Douglas, we would throw our marker on the table too. We've benefited greatly from Arapahoe and Douglas fighting the big tickets they're paying for. Not willing to just let Douglas decide how it should be, and as they provide services to the poor cousins out east.
That's right. That's right. Well, this is a great place to be. So I know Rory's been very happy out here. I think things have gone pretty well, and the transition in law enforcement's turned out to be pretty good, I think, out here. Well, if there's anything else ever, please let me know. Just reach out. Happy to answer. Usually it'll be me saying, hang on just a minute, Jeff, what's the answer? And then I'll come back on and say it. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.